In ancient Egypt, the personification of the sky was a goddess bending over flat earth, her body a blue arc dotted with stars, her hands and feet, her foundations touching land. In Hebrew, our word for the firmament, the sheet layer of the heavens, is called the rakia, coming from the root to make flat, like a metalsmith heating and beating metal into something flexible. In the book of Job, the creation of the heavens is described as a stretching, tarkia, of molten metal into a bright mirror. If you've ever laid back and stared up into the sky to stargaze, you may have noticed that the sky doesn't look like it's only above you. It looks like an overturned bowl, extending not only up, but everywhere around you, containing the earth. I've heard it said that stargazing makes you feel small and insignificant. I found it does make you feel small, but utterly significant. Because no matter where you are, as you lay back and stare upwards, you are always the center point of the earth around and over which the night sky curves and arches, sheltering and cradling. In other words, if you were Yosef, taking a break from shepherding your flock in the desert of Canaan, and you drifted off just as you were staring upward into the mirrored dome of the sky, you might just be forgiven for feeling as if the entirety of the night sky was bowing down to you. The difference between staring up at the sky from level or high ground and staring up at the sky from the depths of the pit is that when you're down in the pit, the walls cut off the dome. The sky no longer cradles you. The part of it you can see looks actually closer without the breadth of it extending in all directions, but without the curve of it, it's merciless. You stare up at it, and it stares down, but it no longer cares. This is perhaps the first lesson Yosef learns as he transitions from the cherished child and dreamer of dreams to the discarded brother at the base of the pit, the boy to be sold off. That sometimes the world that once held you, that should celebrate you, doesn't care at all. That the people who might have watched over you as you watched over them might sit down to have a meal where it's close enough to hear you scream, as Yosef's brothers did, but that they might only plug up their ears. And that the moment you've been abandoned, you can no longer remember what it was about you that was worth celebrating in the first place. Parshat Vayeshev may seem like a tragedy. It isn't, of course, because it's only the opening act of a story that will end in Yosef's personal triumph and in hard-fought family reconciliation. But the part we read this week is the story of the descent into the pit. When Yosef is cast down, the Torah is strangely quiet on what he might be saying, crying or screaming, or even simply thinking. We can imagine him going down in silence and being hoisted up and sold into slavery quietly, even passively on his part. But here's the thing. Later on in the story, in Parshat Miketz, Yosef's brothers say, "We are being punished on account of our brother, whose suffering we saw, but whose pleading we ignored." In other words, the Torah may be silent when Yosef was cast into the pit, but Yosef himself was not. Yosef begged. Yosef cried. I'm reminded of a heart-wrenching scene in Joseph, King of Dreams, the criminally underrated direct-to-DVD prequel, low budget, of The Prince of Egypt, where Yosef tells his captors who have pulled him up from the pit only to take him into slavery that, "You won't get away with this. You don't understand. I'm from the house of Jacob," he tells them. "My brothers will come for me. Judah, Simeon, Levi, come help me." This was the miracle child that the stars in the sky bowed down to, Of course he expects rescue from his family. Of course he isn't silent. So what did he say? And why doesn't the Torah record it? The Torah describes the pit as habor reik ein bo mayim. The pit is empty. There is no water in it. Rashi asks why it specified that there is no water if we already know the pit is empty, and he brings an interpretation from the Talmud that only intensifies the horror of Yosef's predicament. Mayim ein bo, aval nachashim v'akravim yesh bo. Water they may not have been, but the pit was full of snakes and scorpions. Just because the pit is empty of water does not mean it can't be full of something else. But let's look at it from Yosef's point of view. How long did he hold on to hope that he was unforgotten in the pit, just as later he begged not to be forgotten down in the Egyptian prison? Habor reik ein bo mayim. Those last words belong to Yosef. There's no water. We hear him calling over and over in the desert pit as his brothers sit down to eat immediately in the next verse, so close that they could still hear him crying. How long will he survive without food and water? But no one is listening. In the pit, you are always isolated. In the pit, you are always alone. Habor reik, the pit is empty. In the pit, you might be driven crazy as you plead over and over, and nobody seems to acknowledge it. You might doubt your own existence, your own worth, your own voice. Another interpretation of the seeming redundancy, to rewrite Rashi's midrash, ein bo mayim, aval Yosef yesh bo. There was no water, but Yosef was in it. One thing I have learned after suffering from depression myself and loving and caring for others with depression is that sometimes trying to pull a person who is suffering up and out of their pit feels like a betrayal. The person pulling, even from a place of love, seems to be under the impression that with one good tug, all will be well. The person in the pit believes otherwise. The person in the pit finds that so many of the people who are trying to pull them out are doing so without actually listening, without giving them what they actually need, what they're asking for over and over and over: water, help. The pit has become their world. The sky is cut off until often, so often, they fall silent. They lose the words to articulate their own needs. They forget they wanted to ever be raised up at all, and may even resist those who try. When life feels awful enough, the pit is safer than the enslavement that lies outside of it. Depression is not an emotion. It's not a passing cloud. It is a long-term obstruction blocking off the sky. More than immediate context needs to be changed to be able to dream again. More than physical elevation. Some sort of twist, a shift in perspective, a revolution in the world or inside the mind. Such a revolution, a reversal, is described in Psalm 30 that we'll soon be saying twice daily in honor of Hanukkah. Mizmor Shir Chanukat Habayit LeDavid, a song in honor of the dedication of the Temple of David. I've often thought it read like a commentary on the Yosef story, the way it tells a narrative of someone who, like Yosef, was tossed down from on high and then raised up to new heights, who looked up at the sky and then saw only the pit before they were rescued. If there was anywhere in Tanakh where the words Yosef might have cried from the pit were recorded, it would be here. Yosef's brothers ask, Ma betza ki naharog et achinu? V'chisino et damo. What profit is there in killing our brother and covering up his blood? The psalmist takes those words and turns them into Yosef, asking God, Ma betza b'dami, b'ridati al shachat. What profit is there in my blood, in my descent into the pit? Or, if we engage in some minor wordplay, Ma betza b'dumiati. What profit is there in my silence, in my descent into the pit? As if Yosef knows that the Torah does not record his cries. And the psalm itself ends with a vision of endless singing to God, v'lo yidom, singing that will not go silent. There is no profit in Yosef's blood or in his silence. But when the Torah itself is silent, there is meaning to be gleaned. While Yosef and the psalmist undergo a dizzying series of ascents and descents, the reader of the Yosef story can remain comfortably removed, following his story from the point of view of his brothers. His brothers who only acknowledge Yosef's pleadings when they are ready to reconcile, a safe time for the reader to hear about them. But a close reader of this story cannot believe that Yosef went down quietly into that pit. A person who knows suffering knows that sufferers plead, sufferers scream, if only to themselves. If you want to know what Yosef has to say, you can't rely on the narrative. You have to go down to the pit with him. You have to twist the words of the text so that you can hear them in his voice. It is Yosef, not only the narrator, who cries, Ein bo mayim, there is no water. It is Yosef, and not only his brothers, asking, Ma betza b'dami, what profit is there in my blood? The Torah knows how humans suffer. It demands that we choose to hear the screaming of our siblings in the pit, not just read of them later. It demands that we search for representations of our own humanity and suffering in the text, that we don't hold ourselves apart from it. The Torah demands that we identify with Yosef, but it will not make it easy for us. All of those Yosefs down there in the pit, miracle children, in the pit, the view is obstructed, yes, but the rest of the stars are still there. They haven't winked out of existence when they're out of sight. A certain amount of faith is necessary to remember that the sky hasn't changed shape. It still remains the firmament, still cradles all those looking up. The pit is shallow against the depths of the heaven. It is finite, when heaven is infinite. So now imagine you've been pulled out of the pit and sold as a slave. You've excelled as a slave, and you've been cast back down into the pit. You've been forgotten, and you've been remembered. You've been debased, and you've reached incredible heights. As Psalm 30 says, your mourning has turned to dance, and your sackcloth into raiment of joy. Where once you were so alone in the pit that all dreams of something wondrous had left you, now you have learned to store what is good and carry it out of the good years so that it will sustain you during the bad. You have the perspective now to say, Shalchani Elohim, God has sent me to this very place in this very moment. Things may have felt bad and others may have intended harm, but you can say God has intended this all for the good. Now, maybe in Egypt, maybe in your vizier's palace, you can lie back. You can look upwards towards an unobstructed view of the stars. Once you saw your family as celestial bodies bowing towards you. The Egyptians you see, you live with, they see the sky goddess arching over you. And what do you see now? You see the rakia, the heavenly firmament that God stretched over you, magnificus, reflecting, numinous, and utterly without bounds. And you feel small, but you feel significant. And you close your eyes, and you dream. I have so many thanks to give to so many people. Rabbi Robbie Harris for being a sounding board for this and reminding me that there is nothing more magical than a good story. Stephanie Gadan, who patiently helped me figure out what I was even writing about, and for reminding me to trust myself. Rabbi Barry Dov Katz, for your patient attentiveness to detail, and for teaching me that a good drush is not just what I write, but it's what others hear. My father, another Yosef, my first and foremost teacher of Torah, who I only just now learned also wrote about Psalm 30 and the Yosef story when he was here in rabbinical school. My mother, who gave me my appreciation for the power of words, written or spoken. My wife, who opens my eyes to the stars and the heavens every day and every night. And my amazing Technicolor dream cohort, my teachers and my rabbis. You are the biggest collection of Ba'alei Chalomot that this world has ever seen. Thank you. Kadish Rabbanan. Yikadal v'yikadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach yirtzeh v'yamlich malchuteh, b'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala v'zman kariv v'imru, amen. Hei shemei Rabbah mevorach le'olam omei almaya. Yibarach v'yishtabach v'yita'ar v'yitraman v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudesha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, da'miran ba'alma v'imru, amen. Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Talmidehun, v'al kol Talmidei Talmidehun, v'al kol man da'askim ba'oraita, di be'atra hadain v'di b'chol atar v'atar, yehei lahon l'chon shlam maraba, china v'chista v'rachamin, v'chein arichin u'mezona revicha, u'forkan amin kadom ovondi b'shmaya v'imru, amen. Yehei shama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim tovim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Osei shalom b'imromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen.